Greetings, welcome to Introduction to SQL for Excel Users, Part 15, Basic Left Joins. I am your instructor, Dave Langer. The subject of this video is an introduction to left joins, which is a SQL term for taking two tables of data and combining them together in a certain way. Now, this is a very common thing to do in SQL, and not surprisingly, it's also a very common thing to do in Excel. So what I would like to do is start with the concept using Excel, once again, as the teaching metaphor, and then move into SQL to see how it's done in the database world. So what we have here is the spreadsheet, the Excel file for part 15 of the series here. And what you can see is a very, very contrived example. Essentially, what I've done is created a poor man's scenario of a order table and a product table. And these are obviously exceedingly simple, but that's by design because what I want to do is just focus on the concepts. Now, the key idea that I want to get across with this design is the idea of a left table and then the idea of a right table. This is going to be super, super important as you work with SQL to understand how the processing works from a conceptual perspective. And when you start working with multiple tables at the same time, multiple virtual tables at the same time, you need to think of left tables and right tables. And essentially this is a recursive thing. So if you were joining, let's say, a third table or a fourth table, this would be the left table vis-a-vis this table. This would be the left table vis-a-vis this table. This would be the left table vis-a-vis this table, so on and so forth. So you get the idea, left table, right table. And this is super important also because, well, we're looking at left joins today, which obviously has a very particular meaning. And how I want to illustrate this is with Excel's mighty Vlookup function. Vlookup. Now, a lot of you are familiar with VLOOKUPs, and if you're not, that's okay. You can always Google it. But you can see here, VLOOKUP looks for a value in the leftmost column of a table and then returns a value in the same row from a column you specify. By default, the table must be sorted in an ascending order. Okay, so basically what this is doing is saying, okay, I've got my order table over here on the left, and I've got some product IDs. And I also have over here my product table, which I've designated the quote unquote right table. And what I want to do is use VLOOKUP to say, look, for each corresponding product ID, grab the product name and stick it over here in the product column. Right? This is essentially how joins work in a database. You usually have like a master table with all of your product information, and then you have an order table that has your orders. And you don't put all of the product information directly in the order table because it's just not very efficient. It doesn't make a lot of sense. This is typically what you see in the real world. An order table on the left and a product table on the right. We can actually use VLOOKUP to get Excel to find these product IDs over here in this table over here and then copy over the product names. And this is how we do it. We say, okay, VLOOKUP, my ID is in B4, right? So my product ID is in this particular cell right here for this particular order. So use that, right? That's the lookup value. And now I need to tell VLOOKUP, hey, where is the table where you can go look this information up, which is our right table. And we just tell VLOOKUP, okay, it is $G, $4, 4, all the way through $H, $6. And you'll notice here that the entire product table is now highlighted. This is saying, look, take product ID 3 in cell B4 and go find it over here. And when you find it, give me back the associated product name. And how you specify that is by the column index. So this is column 1 of this table, and this is column 2. The product names are in column 2, so that's what we want VLOOKUP to return. So we tell it, okay, return me back column 2. And we say, look, we want you to do an explicit lookup. You have to do an exact match, right? I don't want, if I got product ID 3, please give me back the product name for product 3, product ID 3. Don't give me something approximate. I don't want approximate. I want exact match. So we put false there. And then if we close this off with a parenthesis, Boom. Notice that what's happened. So this order had 22 product ID of number 3 in it. And the product name for product ID number 3 is large widget. So this VLOOKUP went over here, searched the entire table, and said, which one of these rows has a product ID of 3? Well, obviously it's this one. Return back the second column out of that table over here. See that? And if I just drag this down like so, you can see that I get a copy of all the product names where you would expect. And you notice by design, I made these opposite in terms of ordering because, well, it just makes it a lot more fun that way. Okay, so this is a basic left join. Take everything on the left table, take everything in the left table, and that is going to be what's returned from the join. Everything in the left table gets returned no matter what. And then go look up in the right table any matches that you can find and copy the data over. That's essentially what a left join is. Keep everything over here no matter what. Find what you can that matches over here and copy it over. So that's what we've essentially simulated here with the VLOOKUP. This is a contrived example, obviously, and I'm going to introduce you to yet another even more contrived example so that we can understand further the nuances of doing left joins. All right, so now I've got a left table, and notice here a few things. One, I have product ID number 4. And notice that product ID number 4 does not exist over here in the right table, the quote-unquote product table. Also notice that I have duplicate product IDs. See that? I've got small widget and then SM widget, which essentially means small widget. But I've got product ID 1 in the table twice, okay? And we can do some interesting things with VLOOKUPs on this as well. So once again, we tell Excel, we would like essentially to do a left join using VLOOKUP. And it says, okay, Dave, how would you like to do that? Well, I would like you to match this particular product ID, once again, B4, right? This is the lookup value. And then I need to provide it the lookup table or the right table in this particular case. And once again, I say, okay, it's $G, $4 through $H, $7. And notice how the whole table over here is now highlighted. And then we need to say, hey, what is the piece of data you want returned? It's column 2 of the table, the product name, boom. And once again, we want an exact match. We want an exact match. Okay, false. And we hit enter. And once again, cool, right? Nothing untoward happens here. But what's interesting is when I drag this bad boy down. Let's take a look and see what happens now. A whole bunch of things are going on here. There's things that you need to understand that are very, very important when you start thinking of left joins in the SQL world as compared to simulating a left join in Excel world. So first up, notice this. Well, this is kind of what we would expect, right? Because what we know from what I said earlier is the heart of a left join is that everything in the left table is preserved. You're going to get that back no matter what. And then what you try to do is you try to match as much as you can in the right table. And of course, this is a contrived example to be sure, there is no product ID 4 in the right table. So as such, you get back this particular value from Excel, which says essentially, hey, I didn't find anything over here. There's nothing to return. There's no value. There is an absence of value. Now also notice that we had 2 orders with product ID 1, and we also had 2 product ID 1s over here. But notice that only the first product ID of 1 is picked up by VLOOKUP. It essentially says, hey, this is the first match, so this is what I'm going to return. For every time it's product ID 1, it searches the table and it says, I found just one of this, and I found the first one, I'm just going to return it. So you can never explicitly get VLOOKUP to return this out of the box by default. And this is super important because this is the way VLOOKUPs work. This is the way left joins work in Excel world, but they actually don't work exactly the same way in SQL. So for example, while this as we'll see, is certainly applicable in SQL. If you do a left join and you can't find something in the right table, SQL will return you back essentially the equivalent of this, which says, "Hey Dave, I got no match, I got no value." This denotes an absence of value. In SQL, that's known as a null, and you will get nulls back. So conceptually, Excel and SQL work exactly the same in this particular case. However, in the case where you have duplicate matches, right? So technically, product ID has two matches, small widget and SM widget. Excel ignores the second one. It just returns back the first exact match only. SQL will return back both. So what would happen is you would actually get two extra records in the left table returned back in SQL, which would have small widget, and SM widget, and SM widget. Because SQL will return back every match, not just the first one, as Vlookup does, but all of the matches. Okay, you've got the base idea. Let's see how we can do some left joins in SQL. I'm going to flip over to SSMS now. Here I am in SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, and we're going to be using a couple of new tables from the AdventureWorks database for this particular video. In particular, I am going to be using the dim employee table as the left table in our join. So let's take a quick look at that. So I can open this up and dim employee, and you can see that there is a lot of columns. But for the purposes of today's video, I'm just going to use employee key, first name and last name. But you can see there's a bunch of things here, right? Sick leave hours, vacation hours, a whole bunch of different things that you would expect to be associated with employees in the database. And there are a number of employees, so I'm also going to limit it to a subset, to these 6 employees. So I'm going to just take a look at this subset of data real quick, and you can see the various employee IDs or employee keys and then who they are. Like employee key 274 is Sharon Salavaria. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. So this is the subset of data that we're going to be working with in our left table. Now, as I said in the Excel section of this tutorial, when you do a left join, everything in the left table, all of these records will be preserved. They will be returned after the left join, right? Essentially what the left join designates is which table will return all the rows. That's what left join means. Now there's also what's known as a right join as well, where the right table, all of the records are preserved. But in practice, you very rarely ever use right joins. In fact, I can't even remember the last time I wrote a right join, and I've been using SQL for a very, very long time, more than 20 years. So left join, left designates that the left table, all of its records will be returned no matter what. So all of these records will always be part of the result set that we get back from our left join query. Now, this is kind of a pain in the butt though, right? Writing 271 or 274 or 275, so on and so forth. SQL actually has a shortcut for us that's quite useful, and that's what's known as the in. See, in. And what I can do is I can say, hey, SQL, give me all of the records where employee key is in this particular set of identifiers. This is basically exactly the same as writing this all out by hand, right? But it's a lot more succinct and it's a lot more easy to maintain and a lot more intelligible. And it's a lot less typing as well. So it says, hey, employee key is equal to 271, or it's 274, or 275, 277, 282, or 283. Cool, return it back. And if I run this, lo and behold, I get back the same amount of data. So we've got our left table. Now what we need to do is identify a right table, because to have a join, you have to have 2 tables, a left table and a right table. So what we're going to be using for this particular video is the fact sales quota table. So let's go ahead and find fact sales quota. It's right here in the database. And you can see here that sales quota essentially defines whether or not an employee has a sales quota, and if they do, what it's for, right? Or how much. So we can take a peek at the data by just doing this right here. We can run it. And cool. We get back some data. Now, the first thing that we need to know is this. Notice that it is entirely possible for a employee to have multiple sales quotas. And it's also possible for an employee not to have a sales quota at all. So that's important. This is why we're going to do a left join, because what we want to do is say, look, all of those employees, those 6 employees that we picked, we want those records returned no matter what. And we want to join up to them from the right table any sales quota that they might have. And if they don't, that's okay. Still return back the employee, but just don't return back the sales quota because, of course, it does not exist. And as I mentioned in the Excel section, that's what you'll get back in SQL is what is known as a null, an absence of value. So if an employee is in our left table but does not have any sales quota records at all, what we'll get back is a null. Okay? Sweet. So we've got all of our basics here. We've got our left table, we've got our right table. We know that there's an employee key in fact sales quota, and so that means we can join up these two tables. All right, moving on here. Okay, first thing I need to mention is that this is not legit SQL. This is why I'm getting the red squiggly of death right here. And the reason for that will become apparent in a second. But what I wanted to do was talk about this conceptually first. So ignore this for a second and ignore this for a second. What we've got here is the query that we saw before. This defines our left table. From dim employee, where the employee key is in one of these 6 values, return me back the employee key, the first name and the last name. That's the query that we saw earlier in the SQL file here. And then we say, what I want to do is I define that as my left table with this syntax right here. Left outer join. What this automatically implies is anything to the right of left outer join, which in this case is fact sales quota, is now the quote unquote right table. And that means that dim employee is now the left table. This says, hey SQL, I want you to grab whatever data I specify from dim employee, make that the left table. Give me back all of the records in that table, please. And then if you can, join to dim employee fact sales quota, whatever data that you look up and find. Okay, and I'm noticing I'm aliasing these tables in E and SQ respectively. And SQL says, cool man, no problem, I can do that. Now the reason why this SQL is not legit is because we need to provide SQL with the way to match. Because right now, we just say, hey, look, dim employees on the left side and fact sales quotas on the right side, and I want you to join them up, but I'm not telling you how. And SQL says, dude, that's not legit. That's not going to work. So what we need to do to make this actually work, make it legit SQL, is include an on clause, or what's also known as a join condition. So this is the fully legit SQL. From dim employee, pull all the records where employee key is in this particular subset of data. Go ahead and join to it, left outer join to it, fact sales quota on where the employee key in E, which is the left table, is equal to the employee key in SQ, which is the right table. And we can go ahead and run this. Now, here's the thing, and this shouldn't surprise us. Notice that we have 6 employees, right? Because we have 6 distinct employee keys. But notice we get back 28 rows of data. And that's because what we saw was that fact sales quota can have multiple records per employee. And if I move this up a little bit, you can see, sure enough, Linda Mitchell has a number of records because she has a number of sales quota records in the sales quota table. Notice how this is different than how Excel does it with Vlookup. Vlookup just finds the very first match and just returns that. SQL says, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I'll return you back all of the matches. And if you don't want all the matches, you can filter them out with a where clause if you would like. So this is awesome sauce. Sweet. And you can see also up here that we have a number of employees that don't have sales quotas, and they get returned back nulls. But notice we get their records even though they don't have a sales quota. The null tells us there is no value. I didn't find a match, Dave, so I'm going to tell you that this person, Michael Sullivan, has no sales quota. There is no match in the sales quota table. So this introduces another important concept when you're working with multiple tables of data in SQL, and that is you have to be aware of nulls. You have to understand what they mean and how they work and how you can work with them. We're going to be revisiting nulls throughout this tutorial series, but for right now, we're going to just do some very simple filtering based on nulls or not nulls. So for example, let's say I'm interested in finding out of these 6 employees, right, with these employee keys, how many of them have no quota? Or how many of them come back with a null in the sales quota? Because that means that they don't have a record in the table. Now, the way you do that is by specifying a filtering condition, a predicate in your where clause using is null, is null. So this says, look, if any of the records that come back after this join is executed have a null value for the sales amount quota, that means they had no records in this particular table, and I want them back. So I can just go ahead and run this, and I get back just those 4 employees that have no sales quotas, no sales quota records in the fact sales quota table. This is awesome. But notice that I don't do like this. That's not the way it works in SQL. I don't say where sales amount quota equals null. That's not the way it works. It's is null. That is the proper syntax. Okay? Now reflexively, if I decided that I wanted all the employees of this subset of 6 that actually have sales quotas, I can use is not null, is not null, is not null. That will actually return me back only the matches after these 2 tables are joined together where this sales amount quota is not null. And you can see here, I'm not going to have Michael Sullivan, for example, come back. And here we go, right? And just to make things fun, let's go ahead and order this. Let's order this so that it's like it really pops. Key, there we go. Whoa, we can do this. There we go. Execute. And Linda Mitchell and Jillian Carson. And there you go. Okay, that's it for this video today. This is a very brief introduction to left joins, but now we're starting to do some awesome things, right? We know how to use window functions, we know how to do group bys, and now we know how to work with multiple tables simultaneously. That allows us to create really awesome queries that allows us to do very, very powerful analyses at scale inside the database. I hope you're enjoying the series. If you're finding it useful, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I will be posting 2 videos a week for the foreseeable future. And until next time, please stay healthy, and I wish you very happy data sleuthing.